Welcome everyone to new and old people here. This is another installment of the NanoEducators Quarterly Forum. We have these meetings 4 times a year, and this is a collaboration between my office, the National Technology Coordination Office, where I'm a staff scientist. Hi everyone. Daniela Duran at Nano at Stanford. Wave hello, Daniela. And Marielle Kolker, who is a physics teacher in New Jersey, who will join us a little bit later today. Today, we have a very exciting presentation. Eve from UC San Diego will provide us a teacher's guide on material self-assembly. We have a very exciting hands-on demo waiting for all of you. But before I give the floor to Eve and his colleagues, I want to give an announcement for everyone. My office has been coordinating this event for Women's History Month for 2 years now, and it's been a success, and we're trying to do this again. We're basically playing matchmakers between your classrooms and female nanoscientists. It's all over Zoom. So if you're interested in celebrating Women's History Month and learning more about nanoscience, please check out this Google form. I will put it in the chat and also put it in the folder with all the resources that we shared today. So you can just sign up. It's totally free. We do all the heavy lifting for you. You only have to have a Zoom account and you're ready to go. It's super fun. And in the past, the students have been super interested to just learn what a nanoscientist does day to day and what does it look to go down this path. And with that, I'm going to give the floor to Yves and his colleagues. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Yves Thériault. I'm Program Manager for Education and Outreach at the Qualcomm Institute, UC San Diego, and I'm serving as Acting Director of Education and Outreach for SDNI, the NNCI network, and I'm involved also in outreach with the Mercer group here. So today we will talk about self-assembly. Some of you who may have attended, Daniela's program during the summer will be familiar with the hands-on activity that we will do today. But I kind of developed a little bit, the lesson plan on this. And also we created a program where we will develop a simulation, molecular simulation for self-assembly. So self-assembly, so I will share my screen very quick here. Here we go. So the lesson plan has two components, the magnetic self-assembly as well as the chemical self-assembly. I will start with the magnetic self-assembly, and then we'll go to the chemical self-assembly where we extrapolate to the liposomes, right, that were used for the COVID-19 vaccine. So we have a nice little video on that. So what is self-assembly, right? It's the process where you have separate components, will assemble using basically and converge toward different specific patterns, right? We can call it order. I prefer to call it a specific pattern because sometimes you dismantle a pattern and you reconstruct another one that is, for example, in organic chemistry, we do that all the time, right? So self-assembly goes from very, very little intervention from human to more hands-on from human to get the result that we want. What I mean by that, life. Life is the most sophisticated and really self-contained self-assembly process. Easy to make a baby, okay? And then once it's done, it develops on its own. With all the molecular processes, the different tissue, the specialization is just unbelievable, right? The only thing you need to do is make sure that the mother will feed, with good nutrition, and you have basically life. An individual like us, that's pretty sophisticated. It's pretty amazing. So that is probably the highest level of self-assembly that we can find. And then you go to organic chemistry. Well, with organic chemistry, it's still self-assembly because you simply put molecules in a context, right? And heat or, kind of provide some energy, shake and stuff. At the end of the day, you rearrange the chemical bond between the atoms, which you go from, the molecular assembly of the reactant to a totally different molecular assembly for the products. So that is probably the most interventional, self-assembly. And in between, you have like nanoparticle self-assembly, right? Where you know that if you let bulk matter, assemble, yes, actually atoms to assemble, at some point you get bulk matter. If you want actually to stop the process of converging toward a bulk matter and form smaller amounts, smaller clusters of materials, of elements, then you form nanoparticles. And in order to get nanoparticles, you need to intervene and put some surfactant, right? And we will talk about that in the simulation. So if you put a surfactant, it prevents, this convergence to bulk matter, and you can actually control the size of these nanoparticles. We will talk about that. The first thing I would like to do is talk about the self-assembly. And this is a document that I will put in the chat or send it to Maria, and she can distribute it to anybody. You can actually communicate with me at any times. I would be more than glad to go through this. So it's a nice little document. This is the magnetic self-assembly part. You have exactly everything that you need to do. And there's some diagrams here. As you can see, this is the magnet here. So you basically form patterns. And I will actually go through these patterns and explain why you get these patterns spontaneously, the rearrangement. And then you have actually some questions, and the answer key is provided as well, okay? So that will be the first part. So let me get the hands-on experience started here. So I will change my camera. Stop sharing here. Okay, we don't see. Where is that?
We see your white table.
Yeah, I'm supposed to switch camera here, and it's not happening.
I believe it's already switched. Oh, now we're back to seeing you, but it was switched to the correct
It was
camera.
switched?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, it is. It is. Okay. So if you're familiar with it, I'm sorry for the repetition, but if you're not, so what we need to do here, right, is we provide objects with forces, right? And then we let them evolve in a certain context. So having said that, the first thing we do is we take little pieces of foam like this, and we put magnets like this, okay, on them. So the result is like this, okay? And then we'll put them in water so that they are, free to move, and we will see the different patterns, which somehow kind of mimic a little bit the reorganization of the atoms or the electrons, in an atom or in molecules. So let me get my pen here. So this time, instead of putting, all the foams and the magnets in the pen and then turn them, I thought that I would proceed, separately, one at a time, to see different patterns forming, and then put them in the context where you have several elements all together and see how they rearrange and form the same pattern or not. So having said that, let me see here if I can, probably the best to do here. By the way, if you have done this experiment before, it's kind of tough to glue the foams. So this is the best glue that I have seen so far. This one there, and just how to proceed. You take a marker like this, right, and you take your magnets that are all aligned, and you actually mark one of the end. And the reason we want to do that is because you want all the magnets to be in the same polarity, right? So when you take them, you always know that the right-hand side is the one that you mark, so that when you take a magnet like this, okay, and take this little, tool here, you can actually make sure that it will basically be in the same orientation when you put it on your piece of foam like this. I strongly suggest that you kind of try to use these. I'm not sure if you've tried it. It's pretty sticky. So if you use it, if you just use your hands, your fingers and stuff, it can be tricky a little bit. This is really an improvement on the process itself. Having said that, let's now start the experiment in the bathtub. So we'll take a magnet. Of course, if you put all the magnets with the same polarity, they repulse each other, and we'll do that later. But if you put different polarity, right, they attract. So let's start with one like this. Then if it's red, because I put all the magnets with same polarity on the yellow side, if we invert it in red, it will attract, right? So what happens? Basically, you let them and they assemble like this. Now, what happens if you put another one on the side like this, right? Oops, sorry. And I put above. So you put it on the side here, right? It will bind. But it will bind in a linear fashion. Why? Because they are attracted to the center, but they repulse each other. So let's add one more. So now they again converge toward the center, but since they repulse each other, we have a triangular arrangement, okay? Now, if we try to add a fourth one, you can see that it's kind of tough because the repulsion of the red ones, right? So what you need to do is break this energy barrier and basically force it in. If you do that, then they rearrange as a square, right? So you can even try to add one more. Oops, sometimes they replace each other instead of adding. But I have seen, five-piece configurations here, like this one here. Oops. Let me push it a little bit. Sometimes it's tough, they don't stand, but oops.
Oh, now we see the corner of the we
Yeah,
lost
so now,
it.
oops, sorry. Here we go, sorry.
Yes.
All right, so now we have five. So I'll retract one of them. And what I will do is I will form very quick, without necessarily showing it, I'll form another four-piece assembly, very quick. In the other corner here. All right, so now we have two separately like this. Now let's add a piece that will attract the reds. So this way, just in the middle, and see, let's observe what happens. Oops. Let's do it again. Sorry. Okay, put it here. So it assembles to the first one first. And if we let it evolve, it will assemble, both pieces will assemble together. You have to be patient. Sometimes it doesn't work, but this morning it did.
I think there's a little bit of surface tension between the edges of the box. Maybe if you put the two systems in the middle, they might work.
So if I get them a little bit closer, now you can see that they will reach each other. And then they reorganize a little bit. So you can see this one tries to rotate a little bit. So now if you were to put it in the middle like this here, right here, see there's a force, pushing these two here. That's why it kind of twists a little bit. So you can play with this. If it was in the middle, this one would even reach the yellow ones. So anyway, it's an easy way to demonstrate that if you put elements that are equipped with some forces, attractive and repulsive forces, that you can form patterns. The next experiment is to put all the magnets, 30 of them, in the same with the same polarity and see what happens in the pan. So it will take, of course, the maximum possible space. So let's see the phenomena, how it happens. So what I like to do for this experiment is to add all of them from the middle so that there's no, you can see that really the forces that push them on the corners is really the repulsive forces. By the way, if you use aluminum, it is biased a little bit because the aluminum sides will attract the magnets, okay? So let's just do, let's do red here. So you put them from the center, so you can see that they repulse each other. You don't bias them. Just in the center, center, center. This happens. Do not put them on top of each other. You have to be careful because if you get too close, they will just jump on each other. Okay, so 3 more. All right. So you can see they occupy pretty much, the entire space. They repulse each other as much as possible. And they form kind of an equilibrium. So what we will do next is we will turn them. Let me see if I can. Yeah, that's probably better like this here. So if we turn them, we would expect that some of the patterns that we had at the beginning, right, the triangles and maybe the four pieces assemblies will happen. So let's turn this one and see what happens here. So we form effectively, a triangle configuration. Let's do another one right here. So you can see that the configuration is triangular here. And here, because of the attraction between two, it's kind of deformed. It displays this one. Let's push it back. Let's turn this one here. So you can see this one has a tendency to go there. So see these ones assemble, then it converges there a little bit. This one moves. So they reorganize, right? So you can see like triangular, four-piece pattern, and here kind of a triangular, but it is deformed a little bit because of the attraction of the yellow with these two. So normally they would be right triangular like these ones, but because of the long-range interaction, it's deformed. So you can now see what happens if we continue. See this one there goes to the, and this stops because this is a you cannot, breach this energy barrier. Let's turn another one. You see, it's slow, but, they kind of reorganize. So you can play with this. I'm not going to spend an hour doing this. But as you can see, you can form different patterns and understand that sometimes because of the constraint of the network, you cannot form, these perfect triangular. They will rearrange in terms in configuration that have nothing to do with triangles and squares and so forth. Right, so that's the experience. So this is very good to mimic, let's say, something like ionic bonding, let's say. And Ricardo will show you what we develop as an application for ionic bonding. So I will put this aside. And I will talk now about chemical bonding or chemical self-assembly, which is the first part of the document. So here it explains again what self-assembly is. And now we're going to do an experiment with sodium alginate and calcium chloride. And you've probably done that. If not, I will demonstrate it in a minute. And then there's the analogy between the self-assembly, the spherification of the calcium chloride with the alginate, sodium alginate, and the COVID-19 liposome formation. So you can read this. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this, but you have a good picture here. This is the alginic acid that will form, actually, that will be used for the sodium alginate. So the sodium alginate is pretty free like this because sodium is monovalent, while calcium is bivalent. So what you have here is the process of spherification where alginate actually will condense, toward a core here. So the analogy with COVID-19, well, actually the formation of the core here is driven by, a phenomena that is similar to the calcium alginate. You have here the negatively charged mRNA, and there is an ionizable cationic lipid that binds to these phosphate groups. This forms the core. And then the surrounding then is a layer of non-cationic lipid, pegylated lipid, and cholesterol, which actually is driven by hydrophobic interaction, right? So, if you do the calcium alginate, experiment, it's kind of cool because you can demonstrate how, the spherification process can capture the colorant molecules. If you can capture colorant molecule, that you can capture also drugs, right? The first liposome, nanoliposome formulation was developed in 1995, way before COVID-19 vaccine, right? And this actually was to entrap a high level, very high amount of doxorubicin. So the idea was to have a core here, and instead of mRNA, it was the drug itself, small molecule drug, much simpler. And it was embedded in, a double layer of lipid. So the evolution of nanoformulation through the last 20, 25 years really helped Pfizer and Moderna to put their vaccine together. There is no way they could have been able to develop, the vaccine in 1 year and distribute it to millions of people. We had quite a bit of a history behind it. So let me play this little video here. I think it's probably a good thing to show it to the kids also in your classes. I will play a video that explains the self-assembly and why some of the ingredients in the vaccines are there.
When nanotechnology saved the world. In this video, we will look at the detailed formulation of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine and explain how the vaccine works. The COVID-19 virus bears spike proteins on its surface. Thanks to modern sequencing technology, we could design the mRNA that codes for the spike protein. When embedded in a lipid nanoparticle, the mRNA can be delivered to human cells via vaccination, and those cells produce the spike protein in the human body. The presence of the spike protein triggers the production of antibodies, T cells and B cells, which are responsible for the destruction of the virus in case of an infection. The active ingredient in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the mRNA coding for the spike protein with a slight modification consisting of a replacement of uracil by N1-methyl pseudouridine, which helps evading the immune system, which could destroy the mRNA. Excipients include lipid nanoparticles protecting the mRNA and helping in its delivery to the cells. 4 types of lipids are used: ALC0315 ionizable cationic lipid, DSPC non-cationic lipid, ALC0159 pegylated lipid, and cholesterol. The chemical structure of ALC0315 ionizable cationic lipid is shown in the left bottom corner. In the model of the nanoparticle, we will use its graphic representation shown on the right. Similarly, the chemical structure of DSPC non-cationic lipid is shown on the left, and in the model of the nanoparticle, we will use its graphic representation shown on the right. The chemical structure of ALC0159 lipid is shown on the left, and in the model of the nanoparticle, we will use its graphic representation shown on the right. Finally, the chemical structure of cholesterol is shown on the left, and in the model of the nanoparticle, we will use its graphic representation shown on the right. Ionizable cationic lipids bind to the negatively charged phosphate groups of the mRNA, forming a core, which is then surrounded by non-cationic and pegylated lipids, which results in the formation of a lipid bilayer, or liposome, as shown in the self-assembly. Cholesterol is added to provide stability and fluidity to the nanoliposome. Pegylated lipids help the nanoparticles to evade the immune system and also prevent their self-aggregation, which would be detrimental to the stability and bioavailability of the vaccine. Monobasic potassium phosphate and dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate are added to preserve physiological pH. Sucrose prevents the formation of ice crystals in the nanoparticles, which can lead to their breakage. Potassium chloride and sodium chloride are added to preserve osmotic equilibrium. I hope that you learned and enjoyed the video.
All right. So let's, and you have here, the entire protocol, how to make the solutions and so forth. One thing I would like to mention is, you have the choice. If you do the training only with teachers, it's okay to probably purchase these ones here. Just a second. Switch my camera. So you have these little packets, right, that you can use, order from Amazon, but this is quite expensive. What we did at UCSD is after the training, we provided teachers with enough materials to cover 150 students per teacher. So what I suggest is you go for bulk instead, much, much cheaper. This is a bunch of sodium alginate. It's also available on Amazon. And we bought the sodium chloride in bulk like this. It's about like 5 to 10 times much cheaper. All right, so having said that, let me get started with the self-assembly. So the spherification really of, the sodium alginate and calcium chloride, it's really cool because the way we do it, we prove that the system can capture the colorant molecule. And this is very similar to what happens when you have, a liposome embedding a small molecule drug. So let me get, the materials here. Switch my camera. Okay, so you take 1 spoon of calcium chloride like this, put it in a pan, circular pan like this. You add 3 cups of water as well as half an ounce of green colorant. The result is like this. So it's pretty dark, but you want it dark so that you can see, the colorant through the spheres that will be, the beads that will be formed. The first thing I do when I do the experiment is I show that if you put alginate only, okay, this is actually a solution of alginate here. And it's you have all the proportions needed in the syllabus, in the lesson plan. So if you take actually sodium alginate and put it in water, you can see that nothing really happens, right? It just dissolves, which makes sense because this is how this solution was made, by basically, dissolving sodium alginate in water. So nothing happens. Now, what will happen if we take this little strainer here, put it in the pan, so that we can control what's happening in the middle, and we add dealginate into it. All right, so one drop at a time. I like to do like 3 of these droppers. We'll just do 2 right now. Here we go. Important to do it the 1 drop at a time as much as possible.
I'll kind of gear the content more.
All right, so what I did here is I made sure that the colorant is in the calcium chloride solution, not in the alginate. The alginate is already green to start up with, it's not convincing. But if the colorant is in the calcium chloride solution, then you can see that the colorant has been captured, right? Oops. Oops. Has been captured in the beads. Here we go. Kind of weird here, the angles, right? So we were able to capture actually the colorant molecule in the spheres of alginate that are actually brought together thanks to the presence of calcium chloride. So that's what we wanted to prove. So in the lesson plan, let me share my screen again here differently. You have the entire procedure and then, the questions with the answer key, right? So we had the kids, well, what do you think happens? Why the beads are green? Because they capture the colorant and so forth. And then understanding the process, they can come back, and, try to explain, what happens with, and demystify the composition of the COVID-19 vaccine, and then explain what self-assembly is in their own words. So I'm going to put this document in the chat as we proceed with now the molecular simulation that Ricardo and Sachin put together. And again, this is, an extension. I thought, to teach self-assembly, these little hands-on experiments are super. Now, what would it be nice to look at the real world of, the molecular world? What is the best way to do that? Well, probably through a molecular simulation, molecular dynamics, and at the same time, incorporate some computer science into the process, right? So Ricardo and Sachin will present their little application here. And this is a start, by the way, but this will evolve in something bigger. We will, test it with a few people, a few teachers in San Diego. So the teachers who are in this area, let me know if you're also interested to, test it wherever you are. We will give you access to the application as well. We'd like to have feedbacks as much as possible because this will actually, hopefully by the end of this cycle of NNCI, we will have an application that will be used in the classroom in conjunction with the little hands-on experiment and the lesson plan that I just talked about. So Ricardo and Sachin, please take it over.
All right. Thanks for the brief introduction of what we're going to be doing. First of all, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sachin, as well, for developing the entire website. This is absurdly gorgeous. We've been working on this website for a few months now, and it's basically like an overall tool for high school students to learn about self-assembly, intermolecular forces, and we're going to explain a few of the primary ones that take a role in the tools that we've already developed, and a little bit, as Yves mentioned, in computational chemistry and maybe even computer science as well. We can talk about data analysis and how we can even modify the tool that we already have to make the data available for students to download and maybe operate under it, so in essence, basically what we have so far, this is our little home page. We have two tools that are already ready. We're going to create a third tool here, which is going to be based on the liposome self-assembly that Yves was just talking about. It's basically going to start from a solution of lipids and water and how they're going to over time associate into like that spherical shape that we just noticed. But for now, what we have is an ionic bonding tool, which mimics for now what Yves mentioned on the magnets, right? So it's a 2D visualization of ions in a system, and it shows basically how Coulombic forces organize these ions in a pattern, right? So if you have a bunch of positive ions in one side of the unit cell and a bunch of negative ions and the other side, eventually, as you let them sit through time and through a few of the excitations that we're going to apply, and I will explain them in more detail in a second, this system is going to form that kind of grid pattern that Yves was showing before, right? We also have a gold nanoparticle self-assembly visualizer. This is not a simulation that the student is going to run himself or herself. It's more kind of like a predisposed set of atoms that we've already simulated, and the students can watch a video of what happens when the system is just dissolved in water. So gold is just solvated in water versus when gold is solvated in the water with the presence of those surfactants, so those molecules that bind to the little gold cluster surfaces, preventing them from forming a bigger material and rather forming gold nanoparticles, which are useful in several important areas of science nowadays. In the bottom here, we're going to have a set of documents that we're going to list about self-assembly, about these intermolecular forces, as well as kind of know more about computational material science as well. I'm going to go through the tools one by one, and then I'll leave at the end for questions and for feedback, because I think it's better to just go through the whole process sequentially. But starting with the ionic bonding tool over here, I'm just going to read the top here, but this tool demonstrates how atoms arrange themselves in materials due to the forces between them and how changes in their environments affect these arrangements. So again, similar to the magnetic area that Yves was talking about, but rather than magnetic forces, you're going to deal with kind of Coulombic charge forces. There's a little bit of text here that talks about the charge on each atom, the force experienced by each atom, and then follow these instructions below to set up your system. Try creating an unstable structure by following the attraction and repulsion rules, or in other words, setting up positive charges close to each other, and the same for negative charges, so that we can basically see what happens once they intertwine, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start with the demo here. There's instructions on how to do all of this that I'm going to do right now, but basically we're going to start with a system of just sodium and chloride, right? So I'm going to put a bunch of sodium here kind of loosely arranged on one side, and then I'm going to put a bunch of chlorine loosely arranged on another side as well. I'm not going to keep much control of the amount of them because I want the system to be slightly imperfect, but still show like some level of self-assembly. Next, what I do is that I click on these plus and minus buttons here on the side to add the positive charge to the sodium atoms. So I add to each of them. So far, we are just limiting the materials to have up to 50 atoms, and that's just because of the time that it takes to run these simulations in the background, right? But eventually, as we kind of improve the tool, maybe we're going to even be able to host it on one of the university supercomputers, then it might be a lot faster and we can allow students to just go at it and put as many atoms as they want, right? So I've put all of my atoms here. As I mentioned, I put like a few of them on one side of the box with positive charges and a few of negative charges. So as we saw from Yves' tutorial, these would kind of want to separate each other on the left and separate each other on the right. But also in Yves' box, we were contained by a box. Here, we're basically imagining that this kind of square of material or rectangle of material here is periodically distributed in the X and Y axis, right? We're just dealing with a 2D simulation for now. I'll explain why in a second, but we basically assume that this region here is periodically infinitely repeated on the X axis and on the Y axis, because if you think about a sodium chloride crystal, it's basically a bunch of ions like that, right? So Next step is to click and view visualization here. It takes about 1 to 3 minutes. It takes less than 10 seconds to run these simulations usually, but right now the time that's taking longer is to create the video for this simulation or what's going to happen to these atoms. And that's also one of the limitations why we're only doing 2D systems for now. Because when you watch them through a video, if you watch the atoms self-assemble, like if you're watching a 3D structure through a 2D screen, basically what's going to happen is that you're not going to see the atoms that are self-assembling in the back plane, you know? So we tried rotating the video a little bit, but that didn't work too well. So we've been trying to work with a tool that's basically going to allow you to rotate the atoms while you watch the video so that you can see everything that's happening on the entire structure, right? So that we can move on to 3D and basically show that the 2D self-assembly mechanism that Yves illustrated with the magnets can also be observed in 3D with materials, and in fact is going to have kind of like a bulk behavior, right? So I'm just going to wait a few more seconds here for the simulation to run, and then we're going to get presented with this results page over here, right? And then there's going to be a new results page for any simulation that the students run. There's a little bit of text on the background of what was the simulation and what was ran here. For now, I'm going to play the video and show a little bit of the results, and then we can kind of summarize what's going to happen over here. So you see that these are the atoms that you originally put in. If I recall it correctly, yeah, we put the chloride on the left and the sodium on the right. But as I mentioned, this is a periodic box. So the way that the algorithm kind of determined where the atoms were going to be is that it just established that the atoms that were more towards the bottom reached the top of the box. The atoms that were more towards the left reached the right of the box. But in essence, this is basically the system that we designed right before. And as I mentioned, it's kind of an imaginary box that was designed for that system, as well as several periodic images of that system around so that you see the whole pattern, right? So once I play the video over here, you see the atoms starting to kind of assemble already in that pattern. Then they start clumping together into a square shape. And you can see that by now they already have a somewhat pretty stable structure. Now we're heating up the material all the way to 1,000 Kelvin in a process that we kind of call annealing. And then eventually you see that 1,000 Kelvin, once we allowed for the volume of the box to vary, they found a very stable configuration, right, where they occupy most of the volume of the box, and they are very well self-assembled into this kind of like positive negative charge rate. And then below here, we have the plots. This is perfect. Like this is the best live demo that I could have done because the structure came out exactly how I wanted it to do. But you can see a few of the thermodynamic properties that we've observed from the system, right? And these are all like properties that you can explore in activities. So for instance, the total energy would basically be equivalent to kind of the Gibbs free energy or the stability energy of the system, right? So you start with a very high energy system here. You go through this algorithm minimization, which is basically the computer saying like, let me move this atom a little bit to the left and then calculate the overall Coulombic force of the system everywhere. And then I'm going to do this through like 5,000 steps at no temperature. So you can see here that the temperature in the beginning is 0. And let's see how we can reorganize the atoms. The computer does good up to a certain point, but then eventually you see that it stops kind of optimizing. It found the most optimal configuration that I could try. I'm going to try to find part of the video here where it was. So it went from the very disturbed energy configuration to this slightly more organized configuration over here, where you at least have intercalation of positive and negative ions. Then you start heating up the system at constant volume. So this box here, the only difference is that it's going to become a square while running until 300 Kelvin. Which would be room temperature. And you can see that the atoms start displacing. And then until they reach this kind of like square box shape over here, right? So you can see that the total energy starts increasing a little bit because you start adding some kinetic energy to the system. You're adding temperature to it. So you're allowing the atoms to vibrate. You can see that the highest contribution of the total energy is the Coulombic energy, right? The temperature is also raising here. The volume was being just transformed into a square, as I just mentioned, and then the pressure was being allowed to vary. So that's why it fluctuates a lot. Eventually, when we get here, we allow for the pressure to be constant and for the volume to vary so that the box kind of readjusts. This is what's going on here. You can see that as soon as you allow the box to change, it found a lower configuration energy until eventually you start heating up the system all the way to 1,000 Kelvin. This is a process that we call annealing, which is basically so 1,000 Kelvin was reached around here. And we allow the system to vibrate a lot. This would be equivalent, for instance, whenever you found those magnets in the box that were inverted and they were kind of forming slightly incorrect structures and you wanted them to find global minima structures, you would basically shake the water, so add some like thermal energy to that box so that they would reach some newer configurations. This is basically what we do here. We allow the box volume to change, and then you can see that at 1,000 Kelvin, the atoms had enough energy to reorganize and form that shape that we saw towards the end, until eventually we start cooling the material down at constant pressure, but allowing for the volume to vary until we found the material in the most stable configuration afterwards. And you can see here that the original configuration at 300 Kelvin, so at room temperature, was already stable, but once we heated it up and allowed the system to find new configurations, it converged into an even lower total energy, right? There's occasions in which this might not happen, depending on what happens to the box size, depending on how far the atoms are placed whenever the student is creating them, depending on how many positive and negative atoms the users put. But we even put this like kind of press the belt button here. If you notice any anomaly, if you don't see that the lowest energy is at the end, because then they may have found some like interesting configurations. So it's kind of like a room for interaction as well, right? So as I mentioned, a bunch of activities that can be done through here, observing like the isovolumetric, isobaric, and isothermal parts of the simulation, observing the simulation as a whole, as well as reading a little bit more about annealing, what it's useful for, and like what's happening between the Coulombic forces and the thermal forces that you're adding to the system, right? Or the thermal energy that you're adding to the system. So moving on really quickly to the gold nanoparticle. This is our second tool for the system. I'm sorry, for this website. And this is basically a tool, as I mentioned, that you visualize simulations that have already been developed, right? So we're going to basically see something like this here, which is a system full of gold. There's water in the background. One thing that we're trying to add is that to show like the water transparent in the background, as kind of acknowledging that it's there, but not blocking the way of visualizing these gold particles. But these are all gold atoms. And if you actually want to compare two structures, you can, for instance, compare a system where you have citric acid as a surfactant, and the citric acid can be, for instance, at 1.5 times the molarity of gold. And then you can compare it to a system where there's no surfactant whatsoever, right? And then you can see the starting positions of the systems here. This is how we kind of randomly generated the system with gold and some of these citric acid molecules over here. And then this is how we created the system with just gold and water. Of course, there's water in both of them, as I just mentioned, right? And then you can see kind of the distribution of the nanoparticle or the gold clusters in the beginning of the simulation. You can see kind of like the frequency of the groups, the number of atoms in each of these clusters, the quantity of clusters within that group of nanoparticles. And then, of course, we don't have anything on the total energy and the van der Waals energy. A quick reminder is that this is a procedure that's mostly guided by van der Waals interactions, because these surfactants, these small citric acid molecules here, they're technically not smaller than gold, but we just put it's kind of like a stick form for the molecule so that the gold can be more visible and the gold clusters can be more visible, right? But as we hit play over here, we're going to see that eventually this system, and you can see kind of the growth of the nanoparticles here, this system maintains all the smaller nanoparticles. They grow a little bit, but eventually the citric acid kind of catches up into agglomerating each of these nanoparticles to prevent them from growing any further, prevent the two gold clusters from clumping together. While on the other side here, you can see that there's these bigger clusters that got formed. These are even bigger. It's just that we didn't wrap them around periodically like we did for the other ionic bonding systems. But you can kind of get a sense of the size of these nanoparticle clusters here without any surfactant, right? And as I mentioned, if we let the system sit at room temperature, so the simulation was running these systems at room temperature, and if you let it sit for any longer than this, we simulated for about 10 nanoseconds, I believe. Eventually, all of these gold particles here in solution in water would clump together because they would be vibrating until they find each other. As I mentioned, as if you kept rippling the water in the other example. While here, even if they come closer together throughout the vibrations, the citric acid is blocking these nanoclusters from merging with each other. So you actually get the formation of these nanoparticles here. Here you have kind of a sense of the distribution as well. You can see that you have a lot more frequency of different nanoparticle sizes here. And then that the sizes of the system of the nanoparticles with citric acid are much smaller than the sizes of the nanoparticles without the citric acid. Because basically, as I mentioned, if this evolved through time, it would just be an entire system with 1200 gold, which is the amount of gold that we initially put in the simulation, right? And then finally, just analyzing the energies of the system. The total energy, as I mentioned, is kind of like our perception of what Gibbs free energy or like the stability of the simulation is. The system keeps stabilizing itself, reorganizing the atoms. The same happens for the system with the surfactant as well. But the difference is that here in this system, you see some drastic peaks over here that drop in energy, which means that like, okay, the system was already kind of stable with these nanoparticles, but eventually two bigger nanoparticles clumped together, and then the overall energy of the system lowered a lot. And then even bigger two nanoparticles clumped together again, and then the system dropped even further in energy. While here, basically, it's just a reorganization of the unit cell, and you don't see these bigger nanoparticle clumpings because the citric acid is already kind of blocking that from happening, right? And then the last piece of information that's important mentioning is that we plot the van der Waals energy. It has a much similar behavior, and it kind of just shows that the majority of the total energy of the system is contributed by these van der Waals interactions in both systems. I think that's it in a nutshell. As I mentioned, we have a few more tools that we're going to be adding to this website, but we really want to hear feedback and as well as questions about what's already been presented.
Great demo, Ricardo.
Thank you.
This worked very well today.
Oh yeah. I'll stop sharing, I guess, and then I can go back to sharing for whatever pieces of information might be asked about.
Okay, any questions were here?
Oh yeah, the website link. Sachin, is this available? Like, can we share that link with everybody already?
Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Cool.
I can drop the link.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like we're gonna have a proper name for the website. Right now, it's just kind of like a set of numbers. The name that this was actually a ChatGPT generated name, but I came up with Material Marvels at first. But also, if you guys have a good idea for the name, we're still open to changing it. I guess we can offer like a one free demo lesson in class for whoever comes up with the best name or something like that. No, just kidding.
That actually is a good little activity for the kids.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, like a competition, right?
Yeah. And everything that's shared in the chat, I'll make sure to capture it for the resource package, and that includes the tutorial PDF that Eve shared with everyone. Maybe a question for the group, for the teachers in the group. How do you see yourself implementing this in your classroom? Or is there like any pinch points that you are not sure how you would be able to do it in the classroom?
I've used the magnets, the magnets in class, and I've just done it under like an Elmo as a demo, and that was with my Wilder classes. And then there's the kids that can handle stuff, and the water's not going everywhere. It really depends on the kids that you're working with, right? What you can do. Sometimes I'll do more of a demo than having them all over the classroom with stuff, because I had some wingdingers last year. This year's much better. So I would love to do the self-assembly stuff, but I have a question about what you just showed us. Do we need to have like an app or anything to do this, or is this all just online? You don't have to sign up for anything or buy anything or
Not now, yeah, and this will evolve. We're giving you early access because we want feedback, but this will evolve over time, and I think there will be a second version, more official, eventually released, right, Ricardo Sechin, and I'm not sure if we'll control it, to be honest. We'll see how it goes.
But in essence, for this version, all is on that link. So far, as I mentioned, the link is just kind of like a number. We're going to switch it to like a website name as soon as we have a domain. But if you click on that link that Sachin sent, 24,199, you're going to be directly prompted to the main page. And then from there, you can go to the ionic bonding tool and the gold nanoparticle tool.
Oh, you should send us, feedback. So let me put my email address for the ones who do not have it.
And then I guess one of the things that we can kind of add to the website as well is kind of a quick video introduction for high school students of what are these computational chemistry simulations? What are they simulating in essence? Like, I don't know if I can come up with like a broader view just for the topics that we've experienced, like that we've described for these two tools. But we can kind of come up with more explanations as we see fit as well.
Hey, Sachin, do we have a feedback capability on the current websites for teachers to send us like feedback via the link itself?
Not yet, but I could add one to
It
it.
might be a good idea, yeah. Might be
Yeah.
an efficient way to rapidly kind of accumulate the results and improve.
Yep, I can do that.
I just noticed a comment about nanocrystal. I'd actually never heard of that website, but from what I'm quickly looking at here, it looks like it's a website directed towards like the creation of these nanoparticles, right? Or like the visualization of nanoparticles, but not really on like what's happening to them. Like the cool thing about like the self-assembly one is that you kind of notice how they self-assemble, right? Like so you don't create the structure per se, you just watch the structure happen from a very unstable structure or from like any other patterns, right? So I think nanocrystal is cool to show kind of like the more detailed design of the nanoparticle, but this is basically like how the nanoparticle comes to exist, And I think that's going to be even more clear with the liposome self-assembly tool that we're going to make, because then you can actually see a whole spherical shape, like, and you can see the particles assembling as well.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? In our last minute, take advantage of having the experts here. Seeing none, let's give a big round of virtual applause to Ricardo, Eve, and Sachin. Thank you very much for your time today. As we've said, yay. As I put in the chat multiple times, this session is recorded and all of the resources shared are going to go into the resource package. The resource package not only has the information for this session, but every past session for the last 2.5 years that we've been doing this. It's a great resource if you're looking for other opportunities or ways to implement nanoscience in your classroom. And with that, good afternoon, and I hope to see you guys in 2 months. We're going to have a special presentation of lesson plans developed by middle school and high school teachers related to nanotechnology and climate. Thank you all. Bye-bye.